Morning. I am going to start by just giving you an intro for those of you who don't pay attention to this, to the industry vision for automated driving. A little bit about the status in San Francisco. Indeed, we are the epicenter. I want to talk a little bit about our policy foundations that we have been relying on as we think about AVs in the city. We're going to talk a little bit about what we have seen in the last 9 months since safety operators have been taken out from behind the wheel. And I got to tell you, the last 9 months have been different from all the years before that of what we've seen. I'm going to put that in the context of street safety and also in the context of our transportation network performance. And usually I talk about things like equity and disability access and climate, but because so many other speakers, including Dr. Whitmore, who follows me, will be addressing those things, I'm going to just stick to the safety and network performance issues. And then I'm going to just share what are our current today conclusions in San Francisco. This is an incredibly dynamic industry. Our conclusions tomorrow might be different, next week might be different from that, but I'm going to share what we're thinking today. So the first and most important thing to know about the San Francisco view on automated driving is we don't control it. We don't control anything. California law gives permitting authority to the California Department of Motor Vehicles for testing on public streets and gives permitting authority for passenger service to the Public Utilities Commission. So we are kind of like sitting in the front row of a movie theater where it's like it's all really big and it's not quite in the right view and we can't control it. So I want to be clear that my focus today is on level 4 automated driving. I am not going to talk to you about Tesla and human-machine interface. I'm talking about the effort to have vehicles driven with no human behind the wheel. That is called SAE level 4, and if you want, we could go through the levels of SAE, but I'm not sure it helps much. So we, in this seat in the front row, what we primarily focus on, because we don't have control, we don't have the ability to permit companies, is that we really just try to make sure that all of the regulators and other cities know what we're seeing, and that's what I'm here for. So what is the vision? You have all probably heard it. The vision is that automated driving is going to increase safety on our streets, is going to dramatically reduce the crises and human tragedy that occur because of human errors. It's going to increase equitable access to transportation, is going to be good for the climate, is going to be good for our transportation network, according to some of the companies. This is the vision, and really what we try to do is focus on what is the reality that is being delivered now, what might be delivered in the near future. So we have 3 companies that we see on our roads every single day in San Francisco. Zoox is testing automated driving. They are not testing passenger service at this time. They are working on building out their purpose-built vehicle. Waymo is testing both drivered and driverless, which these are weird words that we've come to in California. Passenger service with and without safety drivers behind the wheel. They have an ambition to provide commercial service throughout San Francisco 24/7. They've already applied for permits to do so. And Cruise is also testing both with and without safety drivers and is providing commercial service in the limited area of the city between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And they have also sought permission to operate 24/7 throughout the city. And that is an application that is pending, and they do have authority to provide commercial parcel delivery service, but we are not seeing a lot of that at this time on our streets. So these are the vehicles we're seeing today, and tomorrow or in the near future, we're expecting to see these purpose-built vehicles. And when you see some of the incidents that we've been experiencing and you think about these vehicles, I want you to think about the difference between driving a vehicle away from a problem and towing a vehicle away from a problem. Think about the impacts of that on our transportation network. These vehicles have a lot of promise. There's a lot about them that is exciting, and when they're really good at what they're doing, they have the potential to bring us real benefits. And when they're not really good at what they're doing, they have the potential to really cause us a lot of problems. So what's our policy foundation? For those of you who haven't spent a lot of time in San Francisco thinking about transportation, some of the key characteristics are that we are very small geographically. We have population density that is second only to the boroughs of New York City, And we have very limited exclusive transit right-of-way, which means that our transit vehicles, all of them, the buses, the cable cars, the streetcars, the light rail vehicles, they're all competing with motor vehicle traffic. So for that reason, we are pleased this year to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of our Transit First policy. We use that policy to guide our work on major infrastructure projects and planning. We use it with the mindset of prioritizing people and goods movement over vehicle movement. And this is a matter of geometry, not ideology. We are trying to move as many people and things through our very limited streets as possible in limited space and time. The result is that we prioritize transit, walking, and biking. In addition to our Transit First policy and our climate goals and our Vision Zero, we adopted a series of emerging mobility principles in 2017, and we really used them to ask questions of new transportation technology innovators. Like, is your technology going to allow our streets to move more people more quickly? Is your technology going to improve the safety of the transportation network, and especially for people with disabilities and vulnerable road users? And these series of principles, which I usually talk about more of them, the two that I really want to feature today is the interest in accountability and also collaboration. And I focus on those because we think that they are both, from a process perspective, absolutely essential to the project of automated driving. If automated driving is to succeed, there needs to be an acknowledgement of the real impacts, a collaboration to minimize the negative impacts and maximize the positive. All of us in San Francisco, or some of us in San Francisco, spend a lot of our time thinking about the recent history of TNCs. And Uber and Lyft made a lot of promises to cities. Very, very, very slowly, the information leaked out that made it possible for researchers to really analyze the actual impact, and we found that in many, many cases, they did not square with the promises. I will mention just two because they're very, very relevant. In the Bay Area, less than 1% of TNC rides have been used to connect to transit. Also, there is an equity agenda for the AV industry, and in the TNC case, less than 1% of users were over the age of 75. So the ambitions of service to elders are incredibly valuable. We need better transportation and liberty for our elders. But so far, the TNC model has not achieved that. Can AVs? We don't know. You see all those red question marks? This is a history yet to be written. We hope to rewrite the TNC history and work with the AV industry and make sure that we can achieve better outcomes. So since safety is issue number one, I'm going to focus on safety to start. And there are good things that we see from the automated driving on our roads, even the automated driving without safety drivers behind the wheel. And that's really the first time that we're able to see the capacities of the machine versus the capacities of the system with a safety driver. And we've never really been able to see before what the machine by itself could do. And we see a lot of compliance with posted speed limits and a lot of compliance with other traffic control devices. And we have seen the first 1,000,000 miles with no crashes. And that sounds like a lot. And unfortunately, it's not. Not if you're trying to evaluate whether automated driving is safer than human driving. And human drivers are involved in fatal crashes about once every 100 million miles. And so 1,000,000 miles, we are really just at the beginning of being able to do any comparisons, and there are all kinds of reasons that comparisons are very challenging. So there are a lot of buts here. We see a lot of positive driving behaviors, and we also see a lot of concern about the absence of any industry and regulator consensus in how to really measure the performance of automated driving. The last thing we want to do is wait 10 years and see whether after 100 million miles we've got as many fatal crashes, or maybe we've reduced the dial a little bit. We really need to be able to look now to understand the safety performance and to insist that it get better before it scales. So we try to think about and look at like what can we see today that can help us measure the safety future, at least of the capacity of the vehicles on our streets right now. One of the things that we turn to is this triangle called the Heinrich triangle, and it was first developed to evaluate workplace safety. But we think it's useful in thinking about AV safety in these early days because it provides the insight that down at that bottom level, the purple level, there are a lot of unsafe acts. Some of those ripen into near-miss collisions. A smaller number ripen into serious injury collisions. A much smaller number ripen into fatalities. And if we don't have the kind of volume of miles traveled to see the outcomes that we're most concerned with and the industry is seeking to reduce, we want to look down at the lower levels of the triangle. What are the unsafe acts that are occurring? What are the near misses looking like? What can we measure there? I mentioned that it's been about 9 months since the safety operators have come out from behind the wheel. That has been, crews started removing safety operators first. Waymo followed about 6 months later. And the first thing that happened is after about 6 weeks, we didn't know this at the time, we started to get calls from our Department of Emergency Management, like, what the heck is going on? Every day, they were suddenly getting calls reporting problems with AVs. They had never received calls like that before. The trend in this is unfortunately very negative. We are getting more and more calls every day, more and more observations by city workers. They're all different kinds of incidents. They are both companies. They're the primary call. We get a fair number of calls about erratic driving, which might be some unsafe acts, or it might be people perceiving things incorrectly. We don't know. These are just reports. We don't take them to be the gospel truth. But most of them are talking about unplanned stops in the right-of-way, which are called in the industry minimal risk condition events, where the vehicle decides that it's not quite sure what to do, it phones home for help, and meanwhile it stays stationary. And if it gets help, it may be able to proceed without the need for human beings to come save it. But the VREs, vehicle retrieval events, are what occurs when the remote advisors are not able to help the machine move forward. We see a lot of those. And we have no required data. To my knowledge, there is no city, state, or state in the nation that is measuring this, and the US government is not measuring this. So all we have is things like calls from 911 and calls from our city workers who are out on the street. There are just numerous problems with that. What it means is that as much as we might like to look at that triangle and look at the events at the bottom and set standards and use them to help set expectations and to track improvement, we simply can't because we're not getting anything systematic. So what I'm about to share with you is all anecdata. I would love to share with you data, but all I can do is share anecdata because that's what we've got. So there is one issue that we're seeing that we knew we were going to see, and we've been talking with the industry about this for at least 4 years, and that is when Uber and Lyft exploded in San Francisco, one of the things that we again saw but couldn't measure well was just unbelievable number of stops in travel lanes in the right-of-way, anywhere and everywhere, in crosswalks, in bike lanes, in the middle of intersections, in right under the traffic light, all kinds of places they shouldn't be. We did not have a good regulatory response for that. Again, when I say we, I'm using a very, very royal we, maybe the state of California, maybe all of us, but it didn't go well. We have been asking the AV industry to do better on this particular issue. And unfortunately, so far, what we are finding is pictured here. You can see the little green circles in the corner on the left. Those are all human beings waiting to be picked up. You might notice that there's a big area of black, empty curb right in front of them. And then you can see across the way, a Cruise AV stopped in the travel lane across the street and double parking. We've seen way too much of this. It creates hazards. We understand that the engineering to parallel park, to find places, to identify places is very, very challenging. We understand that our curb is very full and has a lot of competing uses, but in our view, this isn't good enough, and it's got to get better. I never thought before about cars driving over fire hoses. Well, some AVs do, and it is incredibly dangerous to firefighters, particularly when they're actively operating a hose to suppress a fire. We have seen a lot of AVs not quite clear, of having a great deal of difficulty, and this is understandable, perceiving caution tape, perceiving downed power lines. These are hard for humans to see, and they have been hard for the AVs to see. We have seen driverless AVs failing to promptly understand what's happening. Let's say my house is on fire. Not only am I going to call 911 and get the firefighters out, but if it's a big fire, they're going to have to set up a perimeter around it to protect the ability of the firefighters to work without interruption. That is a process that takes time. Our streets are unbelievably dynamic, and we have had quite a number of circumstances where AVs are not perceiving, they're not reading the signs, and people at the scene who really need to be focused on other things are not able to communicate. Go that way, I don't care what the traffic light says, you must go that way, get out of here. Other things, we've had incidents, we had an incident, I should say, where a Waymo vehicle failed to understand the cones as they were set up and drove 200 feet into a closed lane and stopped very shortly before an open trench. Now, you could define that as success because it didn't drive into the trench and nobody was hurt. But you can be confident that our street workers don't see that as success. They feel menaced, they are afraid, they don't know how to communicate with this vehicle, and that there's a real absence of the kind of two-way communication that drivers and other users of the street are very accustomed to. One of the key sets of players that this affects is our human traffic control officers, who we rely on every single day in San Francisco in any number of circumstances, around emergencies, around crime scenes, around just normal rush hour traffic. And yes, we do still have rush hour traffic in San Francisco, notwithstanding all the economic context that we heard earlier. It is not plausible for this person who is managing traffic coming from two directions, standing in the middle of the street, to go up to a vehicle and talk to the window and say, hello, you need to go that way. The AVs really need to be able to understand the signals they're getting, to respond, and to respond promptly, not after phoning home, or if it's after phoning home, that call better be darn short. We had in September a near-miss rail crash, and obviously, we were a bit surprised by this. We have a lot of light rail vehicles in our city. The tracks are in the same place they were before AV driving started. And we do not know why this AV entered the intersection while a light rail vehicle was on its way westbound. It happened at 11 o'clock at night. We are very grateful that nobody was injured. There was nobody in the AV. Nobody in our standing load of 140 passengers fell. Nobody was injured. That's great, but we don't really define it as success. You've probably read that a Cruise AV drove into the back of a bus recently. We are very grateful that Cruise acknowledged that this was a Cruise error, that this was a software error. They moved quickly to fix it. We hope that that fix is not causing other problems. And honestly, sometimes the rapidity with which the industry changes things sometimes worries us as much as the fact of the fix. Because how has that been tested? How do we know what consequences are coming from the software fixes that are being made? I want to close the safety section just by saying, our hats are off to the companies that have chosen to start in San Francisco, because we all kind of have an intuitive sense that it's hard to drive in San Francisco. But we didn't really appreciate that, and we didn't have that quantified until General Motors filed a voluntary safety self-assessment in 2018 with NHTSA that really does quantify that, and noted that their vehicles in San Francisco interact with 32 times as many objects as they do on the streets in suburban Arizona, suburban Phoenix. And it's just important to understand that what those interactions are, Those are people, they are other vehicles, they are other things that are moving on the roadway. And so we get it, they took the hard path. I want to just quickly dip into what some of these incidents look like from a network performance. It's a slightly different lens. Some of the incidents are even the same incidents. They have a safety angle and they have a network performance angle. You may have seen this. This was a situation last summer when more than a dozen cruise AVs congregated on a spot they really, really, really liked and decided to stay there for a few hours. It's a cool street. It's a major arterial. It brings everybody from the northern parts of San Francisco south to connect with Market Street and Point South. And obviously, this kind of impact is untenable. We have had fewer incidents. We certainly have not had an incident of this size, but we have been surprised even as recently as last week to have multiple AV incidents that block traffic. So the traffic that we most care about, you heard about from the Policy Foundation. It's not that we don't love all of our road users, we do. But our transit vehicles carry 100 times as many people as are in most of these AVs, the ones that are populated. To be honest, so far, most of them are empty. And these people, 140 people, had to get off that vehicle, wait around. All the people who were waiting for that light rail vehicle late at night to get home were waiting around for an unknown period of time because the AV was stopped on the tracks and couldn't move. This is an area of great opportunity for collaboration because a human driver would have simply backed up or moved forward if it had a clear path, turned. The AV was not able to do that, and that is a key concern for us. This is another incident. Usually our buses are able to reroute or able to do things so that any given obstacle is not a problem. But in this case, bus was surrounded by 5 AVs that all failed again in the same place. There were a lot of riders affected by this. And because this was one of our equity priority transit lines, we are very cognizant of the fact that transit-dependent riders are the ones who are most affected by transit interruption. So we have every month when we get the reports from our Department of Emergency Management, there's a news story. The latest story is this one. I am parked at the curb. I've been parked, I had my dinner, and I want to go home. Only I can't get out of my parking space because there's an AV blocking me in, and I have no way of communicating to that AV. I can honk my horn over and over and over again, but the frustration of drivers who are in this experience is palpable and easy to understand for any of us. So I just want to acknowledge there's some other road users who block traffic in San Francisco. Most recently, I think this was actually not last week's incident with the runaway goats. It was a different one. But these blockages are significant to us, and they're significant especially for this reason. The industry notes that they are creating very experienced drivers, and every vehicle has the experience of all of the fleet. But we have to ask the question, well, what does that mean if we flip that upside down? Does it also have all of the flaws of the whole fleet? And do we have to take these incidents where we have 300 vehicles in a fleet and one of them is stopped in a very, very unfortunate place? Do we have to assume that any one of the 300 vehicles in that fleet would have done the same thing? These are important questions for us. There's a flip side to everything. So what do we conclude? As of right now, we conclude that this technology is still under development. I kind of liked Nico's language this morning. We're still in pilot 1. And yet, because of the economic circumstances he described, the industry is in a tremendous hurry to deploy widely commercially. We understand that ambition, but we are not seeing a technology that is ready for that yet. We don't want to see, until there is demonstrated reduction in this kind of incident, which calls for data collection, we don't want to see automated driving in our in our high travel hours and our most congested places. We also have come to appreciate that these vehicles are not vehicles. They don't operate on their own. They are part of an ecosystem, a network, and they cannot function without the network, and all of the pieces of the network have to work well. So if they phone home and nobody picks up, we've got a problem. These are things that also need to be measured. There's a lot we have to say about data collection and what kind of data would be helpful and transparency about that collection, but I know I'm out of time, so I'm going to switch past even these other areas of concern that are raised to us by many, and note that there are 2 other sessions. This is a very AV-rich conference, I noticed. And I'll be speaking this afternoon with colleagues from the San Francisco Planning Department and talking about like what we would like to see the industry do and how we would like to see the industry work with us. And similarly, in a session tomorrow with UC Davis and Ellie Casson from Waymo, where I'm really happy to get to talking about the solution side. So thank you very much. Appreciate everybody's time.